What is translanguaging? Translanguaging is the process whereby multilingual speakers use their languages as an integrated communication system. And translanguaging is nothing new. It can be a very natural way for multilingual people to communicate. The term translanguaging originated from the Welsh word trausiaethu, and it was introduced in the 80s by Ken Williams, which referred to a pedagogical practice where students in bilingual Welsh and English classrooms were asked to alternate between the languages for the purposes of receptive or productive use. So they would read or listen in English and write or speak about it in Welsh, or vice versa. Ophelia Garcia further developed the concept and states, "Translanguaging is the act performed by bilinguals of accessing different linguistic features or various modes of what are described as autonomous languages in order to maximise communicative potential." Cummings stated, "The development and knowledge in one language can affect and facilitate development of a second language." He mentions how a first and second language are interdependent and rests on a common underlying proficiency, which refers to a mutual central processing system from which both languages operate. Comparing and contrasting two languages is known as contrastive analysis, and it focuses on commonalities between two languages. They include phonology, syntax, and semantic structural similarities and differences, and this can either facilitate or impede the acquisition of a second language. Structural differences might lead to errors in the L2 because of the inferences from the L1. For example, many of my students in China say, "I, with my mum, go to the supermarket." In this case, they use the same sentence structure that they would in Chinese. 我跟我的妈妈一起去超市. Of course, we clearly understand the meaning, but it's an example of how the knowledge from their mother tongue affects the sentences that they make in English. Structural similarities might lead to an easier acquisition of a second language because the learner may recognise features that are common for both languages, such as phonological forms and cognates. For example, some words are closely related in Spanish and English, and it's easy to visualise a connection between the words and build vocabulary. An example may be words ending in OUS in English. In Spanish, they would end with SO. So, curious would be curioso, and delicious would be delicioso. Therefore, it should be easier to learn a second language that is close to the first language, compared to a language that is distant and has a very different structure. Cross-linguistic transfer is defined as language learners' use of linguistic knowledge of one of their languages to leverage the learning of another language. Strategies can include bridging, which I mentioned before about using cognates. Bridging helps mastery of content in two languages. The strategy brings the languages together in order to find connections between the two. Other strategies could include accessing and building background knowledge in the first language. So, students could share what they know in their native language. The teacher could provide resources in the student's native language. Bilingual anchor charts could be used. And students could also research information about a topic in their mother tongue. Another strategy may be students talking in their native language. They could be strategically paired so they have opportunities to speak in their native language with peers during the lesson. Students could take notes in their first language. Technology and online translation tools could be used to translate vocabulary, phrases, and even directions. Students could have dictionaries, which helps them keep track of vocabulary words that they've translated. Multilingual resources, so students have access to bilingual dictionaries, picture dictionaries, and translation apps or websites on iPads or computers. Multilingual word walls, academic and frequently used terms posted in both languages with sketches or visuals. Directions could be provided to the students in their first language. And also assessments. Assessments could be printed and given to the students in their native language. And students could have the option to answer some or all of the assessment questions in their mother tongue. There is a lot of evidence that shows how cross-linguistic transfer is beneficial in the process of second language learning among alphabetic languages. But it can also help students learn with non-alphabetic languages too, such as Chinese. Despite the many differences between Chinese and English, there is still significant overlap of skills, when learners are required to segment, analyse, manipulate and assemble speech sounds. So, how is translanguaging used to create access to content for students? By giving students the tools and using the strategies, it enables them to get access to the content through their native language. We think in our first language, and we use this as a stepping stone to learn more. By giving students access to their full language repertoire, they can use this as a foundation of learning, and this will help them develop their conceptual knowledge, which is vital in order to help students make connections between languages. So, by only allowing English in the classroom, the students can't gain access to all the content, as they will not be able to fully comprehend it. They will therefore not be able to develop a growth mindset, limiting their ability to reach their full potential. All students can bring something to the classroom through their own language, and it creates peer interaction, builds social skills, and promotes collaboration. And by embracing each student's language, we empower the learner. A large number of children start their educational careers facing the challenge of having to master 2 languages, as education is dominated by English worldwide. And this means that English proficiency tends to be linked to financial status or class, as well as race, as not everyone has the same access to education. Let's take South Africa for example. In South Africa, from grade 3, education is predominantly undertaken in English, and this continues throughout higher education. Not all young South Africans have equal access to English in their schools, leading to a situation in which some students are unable to attend university due to their limited access to English. On the other hand, students may be accepted into university, yet with more limited proficiency than their peers, which can result in lower confidence and participation and ultimately lower grades and success rates in their chosen degrees. This results in what has been described by Fanon as the colonial wound, which Mignolo describes as the damage done by the fact that regions and people around the world have been classified as underdeveloped economically and mentally. Research from Hearst showed that English had power to silence students through the fear that they would say something wrong and be laughed at by other students. Other responses included feelings of sadness relating to the loss of their home language and their struggles speaking English, as well as fear, anger and resentment. Struggling with English made them doubt their own intelligence, as their home languages were seen as inferior, and it is clearly unjust to require Indigenous speakers to adopt a foreign language at the expense of their own language resources. Social justice is interpreted as social and civic responsibilities, commitment to promoting the common good, and participation in democratic processes and cultural diversity. In terms of social justice, it's clear to see that in South Africa, higher education context, teaching and assessment strategies are not fair for those students who do not speak English as their first language, and that new pedagogical practices as well as policies need to be implemented, and there must not only be multilingual academic staff, but also multilingual courses and materials. There must be a socially just pedagogic framework to provide equity for all learners.